Hello everyone, welcome back to Evoverse. This time Evoverse will recap the movie from 2013 titled Detour. The movie tells the story of a man who tries desperately to save himself after a mudslide buries him in his car. How is the next story? Let's review the storyline of this movie. We remind you all what we are going to say. This is a spoiler. For those of you who don't have a problem with spoilers, let's continue the story and enjoy. The movie begins with a scene that shows a man waking up from his unconsciousness, as it can be seen that this man seems to have just experienced an accident. He also looked around, but there was no sunlight visible at all. In other words, he and his car were buried in the ground. The car door also could not be opened because it was held by the pile of soil. In a state of panic, he tried to call 911, but unfortunately, the cell phone signal was also not connected, as well as the radio in the car. He tried to search for frequency waves but was still not detected. He tried to start the car engine, but apparently, the car that protected him could not start. Not long after, there was an earthquake that caused the car to move further in. He thought that if there were earthquake like this, then he was certainly not buried on flat ground. He also recorded his own video as a form of information if he was not saved. Feelings of pessimism and resignation to the situation of course befell him, who did not know what to do. He hoped that soon there would be a rescue squad who knew about this incident. At this time the time showed 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which should still be a possibility for him to be rescued. He also tried to remember what happened while drawing his travel route. At first, everything was fine on the trip, but there was one incident that suddenly happened to him to the point of being underground. Then he realized something: the sunroof in his car had begun to crack due to the enormous soil pressure. Of course, this is not a good thing, especially when he can only stay in the car. Even the air conditioner in the car can only emit dust. Ants also began to enter the car through the air conditioner hole. To prevent ants from entering more and more, he closed the air conditioner hole. This man was increasingly panicked because until now there was no sign that he would be rescued. In a state of resignation to the situation, he watched the video recording on his cell phone. In the video, there was his fiancée named Lori, and from this, it was discovered that this man's name was Jackson. After that, he planned to just sleep while saving the cell phone battery. Long story short, Jackson woke up from his sleep and realized that the clock was already showing 8 o'clock at night. He had been waiting underground for about 8 hours. But there was still no sign of help coming. Jackson, who was getting more and more claustrophobic, tried to find a gap so he could breathe. When he opened the car window, all the soil that was outside spilled over and got inside. The texture of the soil that soiled him was also still wet and mushy. From this it was confirmed that the incident that happened to him was a landslide. On the other hand, the crack on top of his car seemed to be widening. Immediately, Jackson patched the glass with tape available in his car. Then he took the steering wheel lock to hold the weight of the soil. Fortunately, Jackson's method was quite effective. The water supply in his car was only limited to 1 bottle of water. Without realizing it, Jackson drank all the water until it ran out. He was so thirsty, he didn't remember that the water was the only water he had. Time after time, only a miracle could bring him to safety. Therefore, Jackson took the time to pray. After finishing, he realized that just praying was not enough. He also had to try as much as possible to get out of there. Jackson checked the back seat of his car and saw a lot of items that he could use. In a situation like this, he should be able to do something with the items available. The first thing Jackson did was to drink the water dripping from the ground. He didn't care what the water consisted of. He also deliberately made a small hole in the glass while collecting the dripping water from an empty bottle. So bad, Jackson, who wanted to pee, inevitably had to pee in his own car. Then he took parts of the folding chair to make some sleeves. At that time, Jackson also perforated the sunroof in his car with a small knife, with the aim that the iron sleeve could penetrate to the top. To keep the sleeve straight, Jackson took a bottle cap to perforate and then tied it with a rope. But Jackson, who felt hungry, made himself have to eat first. Even though he only had a biscuit, but still it was very meaningful in circumstances like this. To drink, he only relied on water mixed with soil that he had collected. After finishing eating, Jackson pushed the sleeves slowly through the ground. One by one of the sleeves he had was hooked with a rope so that it could penetrate the surface of the ground. Oxygen levels continued to deplete, making him unable to stand it anymore, so Jackson had to make a hole so he could still breathe. The longer it got harder to push the sleeve through to the surface. Even in conditions of weakness and hunger, Jackson had to keep exerting himself as much as possible. After that, he immediately checked the level of depth with the wire he had. It turned out that the distance between the ground and Jackson's position was approximately 9 feet. He shouted as loud as possible in the hope that someone would hear his voice. At the same time, he also breathed through the hole. Then Jackson had the idea of making this sleeve function as a chimney, with the aim that the smoke coming out of the ground would be seen by others. But the fire made by Jackson with paper got out of control. But fortunately, the fire could still be extinguished as quickly as possible. When Jackson wanted to peek through the hole he made, suddenly there was an earthquake and Jackson's head hit the iron. Not long after, Jackson woke up with an injured head. At that time, he also opened his shirt and belt as a bandage to stop the bleeding. Due to bleeding quite a lot, Jackson could only sit limp while thinking of ways to survive. A few hours later, Jackson's head wound was seen oozing pus. But suddenly there was another earthquake that made the back of his car start to collapse. Inevitably, Jackson had to hold the back of his car using the remaining casings he had. Jackson, who was too thirsty, was finally willing to take his own urine as drinking water. The remaining biscuit crumbs were also eaten by Jackson. Jackson took a tire and connected it to the pump hose, with the aim that he could keep breathing by relying on the wind from the tire. Jackson planned to dig out of the ground above him and get out of there as much as possible. He also poured oil all over his body to stay slippery when penetrating the ground, which was so hard. This decision was deliberately taken by Jackson to survive alive, although he himself also did not know whether this would work or not. At that time, he smashed the glass on the roof of his car so that the soil above could come down. This way he certainly could no longer rely on the car as a shelter. The soil that was soft began to harden and was moved by Jackson to the back of the car. While carrying the weight of the car tires, he tried to dig the soil slowly. Little by little, the excavated soil began to fall. After a long time of digging, Jackson began to be able to stand on his car. On the other hand, the remaining air in the tires was getting thinner and thinner. But suddenly, the umpteenth earthquake occurred and made Jackson's entire body covered by the ground. After a long time, he managed to reach the surface of the ground and began to see the light of the sun. In the end, he managed to survive and feel alive again, and the movie ended. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and see you on the next movie recap.